What's up everyone, Alex here. So when I first made this channel, I had a goal of showcasing a bunch of games that people don't often pay attention to, whether it's an indie RPG or an indie game in general, or a Japanese game or a niche JRPG. And the reason for this is because I feel like by only focusing on the big budget titles, like the ones that sell for $70, you're kind of missing an opportunity to explore the other side of gaming, where budgets are maybe less or just not a lot of people talk about them. And because of this huge focus on AAA, all the other awesome games that are like right below that in terms of either production value or just marketing just get fully ignored. So for this video, I decided to name 10 underappreciated JRPGs that deserve a ton more attention than when they launched. And I know that some of these games have been re-released repeatedly, but they never seem to have the kind of support that they deserved. So hopefully this list will create a renewed conversation about these games and maybe just shake things up a little bit. Because again, not every good game is a AAA game. Sometimes it just can be a single A or a double A. And speaking of underappreciated JRPGs, I want to take the time to talk about the upcoming remasters of Class of Heroes Anniversary Edition and Class of Heroes 2G, who are sponsoring this video. Class of Heroes allows you to create a class with students of multiple disciplines as you venture through dungeons of multiple designs, beefing up your characters, buying new gear and armor, and promoting them to newer and better classes. The combination of Class of Heroes Anniversary Edition and Class of Heroes 2G actually has the best of both worlds, because when I started playing this game, 2G was actually very accessible, and if I wanted a more hardcore experience that is very true to this style of game, I could just play Class of Heroes Anniversary Edition and get my fill. And best of all, both games are completely unconnected, so you can tackle them in any order that you wish. Class of Heroes 1 and 2, the Complete Edition, which contains Class of Heroes Anniversary Edition and 2G, releases on April 26th for PS5, Switch, and PC. Okay, without any further ado, let's start talking about these games. Atelier Sophie 2. With the popularity of Atelier Ryza really helping increase the visibility of Atelier games in general, Atelier Sophie 2 was released during that interstitial period between Ryza releases that I noticed that its popularity kind of came and went. But in reality, even though I've played all three Atelier Ryza games at this point, Atelier Sophie 2 I feel is the superior game. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, Alex, but it has the number 2 on it. That kind of implies that I needed to play the first one to enjoy this game, right? Well, no, actually. When I played Atelier Sophie 2, I remember just being able to jump into it and appreciate Sophie's journey, even though I had little memory of what transpired in that previous game. In fact, Atelier Sophie 2 by itself is such a really cool self-contained experience that you can play it as your first Atelier game. And it doesn't have the same complexity in battles and crafting that the Atelier Ryza games have. It's a very intuitive battle system, very intuitive crafting system that's just so much fun to just invest in and enjoy mixing and matching things. Sophie 2 was one of those games that I absolutely spent a ton of time in, even well beyond my review. And if you are trying to get into the Atelier series, I do highly recommend Atelier Sophie 2 as your first one, because you are absolutely going to have a blast playing through that game. Tales of Grace's F. It might seem a bit odd to include a Tales game on this list. After all, it's one of the longest running action JRPG franchises out there. There are entries that get less attention than others, and that's absolutely the case for Tales of Grace's F. It's funny to say that, because in retrospect, we owe so much to this specific game. On top of being just an excellent title with some of the best combat in the entire franchise, it single-handedly saved the series in the West. For a very long time, there was a long drought with no Tales releases on the horizon, until a chance was taken with Grace's F, resulting in a second life for the series. Another lesser-known fact is that the team behind Tales of Arise took direct inspiration from Tales of Grace's F when coming up with that game's combat and progression mechanics. The combat is crazy fast, with tons of nuance and depth. Not to mention, its leveling system allows for a ton of flexibility in how you want to manage your party. If you played and enjoyed Tales of Arise, make sure you give this one a look. You might be surprised by how much you end up loving it. Jack Move. So when we talk about JRPGs, we're also including games that have the spirit and have been inspired by JRPGs, making them their own type of JRPG. And when you look at Jack Move, it seems like it's heavily inspired by both the classics, because of its pixel art style, but also, strangely enough, games like Final Fantasy VII. In fact, its customizability kind of reminds me a lot of a souped-up materia system, but balanced differently because you only control one character in Jack Move. Now, I do realize that that might be a deterrent for some people, but Jack Move is actually balanced so well that it was really fun to play through from beginning to end. And couple that with an incredibly unique animation and art style. Yes, it's pixel art, but you haven't seen pixel art like this before, coupled with a great soundtrack, and you can see why a lot of people love Jack Move. I also want to add that Jack Move is a shorter experience, like roughly about 10 hours long, but it's very much worth it for the price of admission. And given that it's released on platforms that you can play on the go, Jack Move really stands out as that unique JRPG experience that feels full, even though you're only playing it for a few hours. And the work put into this game is absolutely fantastic, and really, more people should check out this game, especially if you've enjoyed games like Chained Echoes. Sakura Wars. One of my first memories of Sakura Wars was during the Dreamcast era, when I got to see this group of women kind of don these colorful mechs and fighting enemies in Paris. And that was so gorgeous and so beautiful that I wished for the longest time to make this game available in the US. And with Sakura Wars, that dream came true, to an extent. Sakura Wars originally was a turn-based tactical RPG, but the version that we got was actually an action RPG, filled with a lot of the elements that the original games had. This doesn't have your traditional experience/leveling system. Your team's performance is based off of your relationship with them. So the better relationship you have, the better they'll perform during combat, which is great. And I love it because of its intense focus on character development, much more so than your typical JRPG. And this is all set in a stylized steampunk Japan, which is absolutely gorgeous and well stylized. And honestly, I'm still hoping for a sequel here, because I think that this is a series that deserves to return and be represented in the modern era. So if you haven't played this game yet, I highly recommend checking it out, because it is a pretty chill game to play, even if it is an action JRPG. Vandal Hearts. When it comes to tactical RPGs specifically, it's probably more common to hear people discuss Fire Emblem, Tactics Ogre, or Final Fantasy Tactics. And as fantastic as they are, it's a shame that hidden gems such as Vandal Hearts tend to be overshadowed. What makes this game unique is that it feels like a halfway point between some of the aforementioned titles. The game tells a very politically driven storyline, but with some monsters and other fantasy elements thrown in for good measure. The leveling and class systems are fairly straightforward, and there's no way to grind. Unlike some more punishing titles in the genre, there is no permadeath. When a unit dies, you get less money, but they'll be back for the next fight. The challenge then comes from spending your money wisely and managing your troops as they wage war in maps with increasing complexity, as well as maximizing the units you have at your disposal. By the end of the game, you'll have large amounts of units to control. However, the game's pacing and difficulty curve are so steady that by then, you'll have no trouble managing it, as you'll be intimately familiar with every single one of them. Simply put, Vandal Hearts is an easy recommendation for those that need an entry point in the genre, but also for folks that enjoy darker stories in their JRPGs. Voice of Cards: The Isle Dragon Roars. You've probably seen me mention Voice of Cards multiple times in recent collabs, but the reason why I'm such a huge advocate of Voice of Cards in general is because of how it distills the JRPG genre into its most basic form. And when I say basic, I'm not talking about it's too simple. We're talking about taking the best parts of JRPGs, creating a cohesive game with it, and being able to reutilize a lot of these same tools to make multiple games. But let me talk about Voice of Cards The Isle Dragon Roars, because this is absolutely my favorite of the trilogy. Many of you still don't know this, but the Voice of Cards series is actually helmed by Yoko Taro, who you know is responsible for Nier Automata, the Nier series, and Drakengard. And in case you don't know this, Voice of Cards does not play like Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering. It plays like a tried and true turn-based JRPG, complete with skills that you can equip and remove, as well as pieces of gear that you can wear to make your characters powerful. And what's great about this is that Voice of Cards The Isle Dragon Roars does have a demo, and this demo actually serves as a prequel to The Isle Dragon Roars. It's very short and sweet, and I highly recommend checking this out if you've even had a passing interest in this series. Digital Devil Saga. Well before the Persona series took off and became one of the biggest JRPG series in the industry, Atlus was known for creating darker, stranger titles that bucked typical trends and tropes, and the Digital Devil Saga duology on the PS2, directed by Persona 5's Katsura Hashino, exemplified this. Taking place in a strange land known as the Junkyard, there are two constants: the never-ending rain and the ceaseless conflict between the 6 tribes. True to Atlus' darker storytelling of the time, the start of the game has our main characters transforming into demons and brutally devouring their foes. This isn't flavor text, by the way. This is an actual game mechanic, wherein after each battle, your party will restore some health after enjoying a tasty snack. Looking back, this is probably why the game was only a modest success, because as cool as this all is, there were absolutely those who felt that this was all way too much. On top of that, while I personally adored the dreary atmosphere of the game, punctuated by the sound of raindrops and the pervading gray tones of the environment, this might be too depressing for people that tend to associate JRPGs with brighter and cheerier atmospheres. However, if you're up for a strange journey that is unlike any Shin Megami Tensei game out there, not to mention if you're up for a game that doesn't back down in difficulty, this just might be the game you've been waiting for. Valkyria Chronicles. Valkyria Chronicles feels like one of those series that have only ever been a modest success in the West. Those that enjoy the series really seem to love it, but for one reason or another, it just never really caught on in the way it should have. I think that explains why the first game was a console release first, and its 2 follow-up sequels were just relegated to the PSP instead, the third of which was never even released outside of Japan. With that in mind, it's all the more reason why we should discuss how great that first game is. The first thing that stands out, and has aged rather beautifully, are the anime-style visuals. While this was still an early PS3 game, the highly stylized art style goes a long way in helping this game stand the test of time. More than just being a looker, however, the gameplay remains wholly unique and engaging even today. Rather than being either a straightforward third-person shooter or a top-down strategy game, it instead manages to be a unique fusion of both of these concepts that somehow works. By limiting the amount your troops can walk and tying that amount to their class, it manages to be both intuitive and balanced. Stronger troops can only walk a limited amount, while weaker ones can run across fields with ease. You're also given a lot of incentive to think carefully about who to bring into battle. While this game can be challenging, I'd still recommend giving it a shot. Its uniqueness alone makes it worth a try. And who knows, this hidden gem might become your newfound favorite. Grandia. It doesn't happen often, but sometimes sequels can overshadow what came before. Grandia 2 was notable for being one of the best JRPGs for the Dreamcast. However, given that PS1 owners were spoiled for choice, the original Grandia didn't get quite as much love and attention as its sequel, which is a shame because it's easily one of the most charming games in the genre. While Grandia 2 felt closer to an edgy 90s anime, Grandia 1 instead feels like a Studio Ghibli movie turned into a whimsical globe-trotting JRPG, far before Ni no Kuni was ever a thing. While the sequel is still a great game that's absolutely worth a look, something that was lost was the feeling of grandness that was ever present in the original. Grandia puts so much emphasis on the idea of going on a fantastical journey, framed perfectly by its colorful and vibrant art style and its beautiful sweeping soundtrack. While the plot itself isn't anything we haven't seen before, it's its charming cast that truly elevates everything. Whether it's witnessing Justin's character arc, taking part in the delightful campfire conversations, or his budding romance with Fina, it's hard not to fall in love with everyone by the end. And we haven't even talked about the awesome turn-based combat, which takes both positioning and turn placement into consideration, adding a ton of strategy to every battle. It can't be overstated just how incredible this game is in nearly every way, and while its edgier sequel is still plenty great, I can't help but feel that the original should have been the one to shine brightest in the end. Monster Hunter Stories 2. When I was trying to compile games for this list, I was actually surprised to learn that Monster Hunter Stories 2 and 1 are actually being packed together and re-released in a full package. That being said, I want to talk about Monster Hunter Stories 2 because it does have a lot of really cool improvements when compared to the first game. If you've never heard of this, the Monster Hunter Stories series is a turn-based JRPG series that has monster taming mechanics, not unlike Digimon or Pokemon. But what's really fascinating about Monster Hunter Stories 2 is how loyal it can be when it comes to applying a lot of the weaknesses and strengths of all of the monsters in the Monster Hunter series. In fact, if you played Monster Hunter World or Rise, when you play Monster Hunter Stories 2, you can apply all of that knowledge that you've learned playing hours of those games into Monster Hunter Stories 2. And for people who are unfamiliar of both the mainline Monster Hunter series or even the Stories series, there's definitely a lot of really deep mechanics and super fun combat that you just won't find in any other game of this type. We're talking gameplay that I swear, like, this is the most fun I've had with a monster taming RPG in a very long time. And that's a tall order, because there's a lot of them competing for your time. So if you're a fan of monster taming RPGs and you want something with a little bit more depth and potentially some knowledge that can carry over to other games, Monster Hunter Stories 2 is absolutely worth checking out. And that, my friends, are 10 underappreciated JRPGs. Now, obviously, this is a subjective list because this is what I know is underappreciated in the community at large, but I want to hear what JRPGs may be underappreciated in your community or group of friends. So post your list in the comments below and share why they're deserving of more attention. Because what I love about what we're doing right now is we're allowing more people to discover these amazing games, all because they are all worthy of brand new attention. With the hope, of course, that a brand new fandom can flourish and blossom forth and proclaim their love for these styles of games. So post your comments and recommendations in the comments below so we can talk about it. Thank you very much for watching, everyone, and I will see you in the next video.